Hey fans, I hope you're all enjoying the program tonight.
You will be a weapon. You will be a minister of death, praying for war.
If you're not inside, you are outside, okay?
Sir, I heard it was the best, sir.
It is the best.
The only problem you're gonna have is that you didn't buy more.
Good evening, Kyle from sunny Southern California. How is hot as hell Austin?
It's sunny here. It actually has not been that hot, which is kind of surprising. Last year we went 100 days without rain, and we had like a 20 or 30 day stretch where it was 100 every day or something like that. We've not had that this year. In fact, it's actually rained quite a bit, and the lake has started to fill back up with water. It's like up by like 10 feet.
Like Travis.
Yeah. So it's actually been not that bad. I was bracing myself for a really shitty summer, and we have ways to go. We've got August, September here is hot.
You're not out of the woods yet. So
Yeah, but so far it's actually been pretty reasonable, and I've been hanging out outside, which is not normal for this time of year. So
I just got to Southern California, started a new job. If people want to know more about that, they can check my LinkedIn. But it is about to get to the hottest part of the year. People here are telling me to brace for heat because it might break 80 here in San Diego County. So I'm really prepping, to maybe get into the 80s. And apparently here that is like peak heat, right? It's like unbearable once it hits 80. Granted, a lot of people don't have air conditioning in their homes or businesses, but it's really it is pretty nice down here. So I do have to say. But how was your first weekend with that world making, world defining news for the first weekend in a while?
it was pretty good. Very busy. Taking my kids to camp. Do the Olympics start on Sunday? Or do they start on Friday?
They just started on Sunday, right?
Okay, because was it a week without world news? Because the Olympics, I guess, is technically world news, but it's not
it happened though. It's like everyone knows it's about to happen, right?
Yeah.
It's like the last supper drag queen controversy. There was a blip of news, but I mean, I chalk a lot of that up to just the French are weirdos, right? They
French.
It's not like some, if you would have seen that in the New York parade, it would have been oh, that's a very deliberate attempt to make a statement. Honestly, with the French, I think it was just a lot of it. I think it's just the French are very idiosyncratic, odd people that just do kind of their own thing.
My stepmom is French. She's been my stepmom for a long time. So I've had my exposure to the French people for a very long time here. And yeah. So Miriam, if you're listening to this, I'm sorry, but I don't think you're listening to this. She's a very nice woman though. I always enjoy getting to hang out with her and my dad.
She's very French, huh?
No, I mean she literally is French.
Yeah, she's French. Yeah. Lives in the US though.
No, but as a dual citizenship. She lives in Chicago with my dad.
Okay.
And if you met her, you wouldn't think she's French.
Okay.
Except that she was very well dressed and mannered. And but no, she's a French citizen. And her mom was French, and she speaks fluent French. And has a French passport and goes and hangs out in France all the time. And my half sister is also fluent in French. Not me.
You're an American.
I'm just an ugly American. But it is what it is. But yeah.
Well,
yeah.
That's people have all sorts of opinions about the Olympics opening ceremonies. Like I said, I just kind of found it to be very French and didn't really think too much of it myself. But anyway, there were important things that happened in the Middle East. We'll talk about the Hezbollah attack on the Golan Heights in Israel that killed 12 children. We're going to talk about the Fed signaling possibly a September rate cut. We'll know more about that in the next week. We're going to go into then Tesla's 45% profit decrease. And then finally, we had an interesting question from a follower trying to ask about, should you switch from a corporate job that's very stable into a startup? How should you frame that decision? Something that I think most everyone will deal with, a question that most anyone in a corporate setting will and probably should deal with at some point in your career. So we'll finish up talking about that. But first story in the Middle East, very tense moment right now that I think people are sort of used to since October 7th, hearing about, war in Israel between Hamas and Israel down in the Gaza Strip. But this weekend, there was a missile barrage from Hezbollah that was sort of mystifying. Hezbollah and Israel are not friends, obviously. Hezbollah rules southern Lebanon. They're a terrorist organization. They're backed by Iran. There's been some skirmishes. They're much more well-equipped than Hamas, partially because they're in Lebanon, right? They don't have like a blockade of weapons like Hamas does. But they attacked a neighborhood in the Golan Heights of mostly children were killed. All children were killed. And it's notable because this neighborhood is not mostly ethnically Jewish. It's a lot of Arabs, Syrians, even some Lebanese people. But Kyle, what's kind of what's the big deal? Why should we be worried about another front war in Israel?
Yeah, I mean, I've been at the Golan Heights when I visited Israel, and I was kind of struck at how like suburban it was. Like, there's just homes up there, right? It's the whole settlements thing, and it's like right next to Syria. So like, imagine living like it'd be a weird neighborhood to live in.
A lot of the people are Syrian too. Like a lot of the people are not. They're like ethnically Arab. They're not even Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
They're Israeli citizens, but
yeah. I mean, I think everybody's worried is they don't want a two-front war, like a full-out two-front war. Like, you don't want like a Gaza situation. You don't want Israel to invade Lebanon because Hezbollah is a much more professional fighting force than Hamas is, and they're both backed by Iran. But the worries it always would like spill into a larger confrontation, and like people like worry about like what would a Middle East a war in the Middle East always has like the potential to spiral out of control because there's just too many like linked parties, right? Like if you think about
right,
like how World War I started, and it's like there's some like parallels to that. There's just too many like people who are like, I'm going to defend this person if they get attacked, or I have to do something here because there's like I'm backing this power or whatever. And that's always like the worry, right? And it's like, okay, we have now two-front war, in Lebanon, and like how much more involved does Iran get? And Iran's backed by other people, like so it's a whole.
When Iran has Hezbollah is the most well-funded militia, right? We've talked several podcasts about how Iran has this kind of like national defense strategy where they fund these militias and they have pseudo control. They can kind of influence them. The Houthis are kind of the one that's gotten the most out of control, kind of telling Iran, like, we're going to do what we want, and we're going to use the fact that you have to fund us because we're a pain in the Arabs and like in the US's ass. So they use that as leverage to basically continue to get aid from Iran. But Iran funds Hezbollah. It's basically a wing of the Iranian military, and they have precision guided missiles. They have tanks. They have like actual military supplies. This isn't just Al Qaeda or Hamas that kind of like run, take hostages, fly hang gliders into civilian crowds. It's a real fighting force.
Yeah,
and
like an actual. I mean, I don't know if they have like armor or stuff, but I think
they do. Yeah, they have like real military assets, and the precision guided missiles is the one that really scares people, right? Like no one thinks Hezbollah is going to like invade Israel and like take over Israel, but they could certainly shoot enough precision guided munitions that it could potentially overwhelm the Iron Dome, like put Tel Aviv underground, meaning like the people have to go hide, right? It's like the air raid on London. And Iran, Iran has said, like, if you attack Hezbollah, like if Israel engages in a war against Hezbollah, it's a war against Iran. And Iran, like Anthony Blinken was saying, like Iran is pretty close to getting a nuke. That changes things a lot, right? That changes the calculus, I think, quite a bit.
Oh, for sure. And it's just like you can see why this area is such an area focused and like, hand wringing, right? There's too much at stake. And it just
when you were there, how far is the Golan Heights from Tel Aviv?
That's not very far. Nothing is very far in that country. It's not a very big country. It's like the size of New Jersey.
No, it's not.
It's like,
yeah.
I think I've heard that if you're in a fighter jet, you can cross it in like 10 minutes or something.
Yeah, I believe that.
If you're going west
north
to
east,
south, and like north to south is like 20 minutes, right? It's like it's not a very big country.
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, like in one day, right? Like we left Jerusalem in one day. Like Jerusalem and Tel Aviv is not very far. And we left Jerusalem, went to the Dead Sea, swam in the Dead Sea, then we went to the Golan Heights. That's how like close it was in one day. Like and that was like in a tour bus screwing around, like hanging out in the Dead Sea and like getting to like float in the Dead Sea and take pictures.
Right.
So yeah, it's not it's very big.
Well, the worry right now, especially, Iran, we all saw that Iran tried to launch those like motorcycle drones right into Israel a few months ago after Israel blew up their embassy in Syria, and then, or the IRGC, excuse me, they blew up the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard Corps headquarters, and then Israel, struck back. But the worry obviously is like Iran, like if Hezbollah starts launching precision guided missiles into Israel and then Iran decides that they're going to join in, then like the Arabs are all of a sudden like, oh, Iran's now weak. We're trying to exercise our influence. What happens there? It's like you said, there's all this conflagration that could happen. It's really scary, especially, given that they're already tense. And there's a bunch of people in Israel that are displaced from the north. There's like all these citizens that are living with relatives in the south.
Yeah.
So the population is not like, it's pretty set against Hezbollah and wants safety, but can their military handle that? That's the big question. So it's pretty scary. It's a scary time right now in the Middle East. And especially with the presidential election, everyone in the Middle East is kind of testing, I think, what will Kamala Harris say? What will Joe Biden do? What will Trump say? Right? People definitely watch during, the last 100 days of a campaign, how candidates react and how candidates, signal what they'll do. So
yeah, this has always been the like why you wouldn't want to change. Like Republicans are like Joe Biden should resign, right? So Kamala Harris can then also get tested in like a period when she's campaigning by, North Korea or
Iran, Hezbollah. Yeah, it's pretty freaky. So we'll keep watching that. Hopefully, we don't want continued violence for either side. It's obviously a very contentious issue. Israel has the right to defend itself. What happens next?
Yeah, pretty much.
Tough.
What happens next? Like what keeps going on?
Exactly. So, next topic, the Fed. Everyone, especially me who just bought a home, everyone is watching to see if rates will drop. And it maybe be coming. Why is the Fed thinking about dropping rates? What's going on? What's different now?
Yeah, first off, me and my wife have extensively talked about this because we're like, well, do we want to move to Atlanta to be closer to the family? And it's like the Fed is just like frozen the ability to do anything like large scale economically for millions of people. And it's like
the housing market is frozen.
Yeah,
it's like the inventory is not moving.
at like 7% or something is just people. I tell my wife, I'm like, look, like we just can't. Like I have a mortgage in the low twos, right? And so to like
Insane.
buy a house at like 7% right now would like drastically alter my budget in a way that I don't think we're like prepared to deal with.
Especially because you'd be buying a more expensive house than the one you have right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Like on an absolute cash, like on an absolute price basis, right?
Yeah, like on a it would be.
Which is the truth for most Americans, right? Most people don't, unless
They
you're
don't
moving
buy
from like
cheaper houses, right?
unless you're both moving from like San Francisco to Des Moines, you're probably
Yeah.
buying a more expensive home at a higher interest rate, which adds several $1,000s a month to your mortgage payment.
Yeah, or like if you're moving from like San Francisco to Austin, or like you said, Des Moines.
Yeah.
So yeah, so
Most
it's
people.
like this conversation is being held like, and I was like, okay, like I don't think we can do it now. Like it just doesn't. Like yeah, there's the argument like okay, well you could buy now and then refinance when the rates drop, but like, and this relates to the article. It's like okay, well if rates are going to drop, right? Like the Fed cranked rates up very quickly, like an elevator, but like the way most economists see it is that they will step it down. Like it'll be like over a period of 2 years, they'll cut, right? And they'll cut in like quarter point increments. So, it's not like, oh, rates are going to drop to 4% next year. Like that's not going to happen. Like it might be rates will drop to like 5.5%.
Yeah, it's like 5.25 and 5.5 is where they're at right now, which is that's the Fed's lending rate, right? So that's the rate at which the Fed lends to other banks. So the mortgage rate is higher than that, right? Because that's
Yeah,
the
'cause it's
mortgage lender goes and gets
yeah,
money from.
yeah, everybody's got to get a cut, right? So, when you look at it, it's like mortgage rates are what, like 7.2, something like that. Like it depends on where
Yeah,
you
I got 6.75 a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. So, and so the idea here is like, okay, could you like, essentially have a short-term interest rate steady in a range between 5.25 and, well, I mean, that's what it is now. But like, yeah, to be able to cut further down, I'm kind of conflating mortgage rates and the Fed's rate, but essentially, like,
They're related. I mean, yeah,
yeah,
they
but
the
like, yeah, to get back to the point of the article, which is what I was trying to kind of like set up at the beginning, is this conversation that me and my wife are having here is being multiplied across millions of households in the United States, right?
Mhm.
And when the Fed looks at this, they're like, okay, like we've effectively, like they look at like different indicators, right? So there's like CPI, right? But you got to imagine that it's broken up into different, there's different things that feed into that, different sectors, different key indicators, and some have a
Right.
heavier
And
weight.
CPI meaning consumer price
Yeah, right. So some have a
Right.
bigger weight.
Consumer
Than
price index. It's like a collection of goods. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so some have a bigger weight than others,
Food,
right?
energy, electronics, sure. And it all goes in and they average that, and then that's inflation, right? That's how the Fed like measures inflation.
Yeah, but like they want to look at stuff like, okay, like is this discretionary? Do people have to spend on it? Or are there other factors that are affecting this particular indicator, right? Like is there some sort of supply log? Is there something going on? It's like they're trying to take all this information and basically be like, okay, like which one of these or number of indicators are basically showing that, like hiring is cooled, wages aren't rising as fast, right? People aren't spending as much on discretionary. Is housing coming down? Like they're trying to basically figure out like are all these like at the target they want to indicate the economy has cooled off, right? Because like they're trying to stick this soft landing where they don't want to like do this for so long and so hard. They're like companies like start laying off a lot of people and like we get into like a spiral where there's a recession, right? And so they're basically trying to say, okay, like has the economy cooled enough that we can cut rates and it's not going to immediately like heat back up again? Is it back more to a state of normal? And so that's what they're trying to do. And so basically they're saying is they've gotten enough indicators that they're starting to have more confidence that it's going to happen. And so if like they start like a rate cut, like the Fed's going to pivot, right? Like there's always like, is the Fed going to pivot and the pivot from its strategy right now of like keeping rates high? And if they do that, okay, like we're going to start cutting rates, right? And like as soon as they start cutting rates, everybody's going to start pricing in rate cuts for like the next 2 years or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like every bank, every economist, every wealth management fucking dude like is gonna have they're like I've seen the charts, I've seen them before. They'd be like, yeah, they'll have this like here's what we think the Fed's gonna do out here because it's like long
Right.
term monetary.
Every lender is going to start coming to you, telling you that within a year and a half, mortgage rates are going to be at 3.5. Which, like, caution to the listener, be very cautious with that, right? Because all it takes is like 1 month of inflated, or excuse me, like raised inflation, right? Inflated inflation. 1 month of inflation going back to like 4.2%, and like the Fed will just stop, right? Or raise rates again, or like Jamie Dimon, or excuse me, not Jamie Dimon, Jerome Powell. Jamie Dimon actually says that maybe we need another rate raise, but Jerome Powell will be like, "Oh shoot, we messed up," right? You
If you look
talked
at
about that.
there's like all these graphs. If you're an economist, right, there's all these graphs that show like they'll look at like historically what the Fed has done and like
Mhm.
when it comes to like raising and lowering interest rates, and it's always like they raise them fairly quickly, and then it's like a step down because
Right.
they're like they'll do a cut and like yeah, what has happened, and they got and there's a lag to this, right? There's a lag to like rate cuts. There's also a lag to rate increases too, but there's a lag to rate cuts. But hey, we're gonna
Right. They probably should have. They probably should have raised rates quite a bit faster, right?
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Which I mean, they did it very fast, right? But they could have done it a lot faster.
they should have raised
So
it sooner maybe rather than faster, right?
yeah, I mean, if they
Um,
pull off a soft landing, then they could.
it's yeah,
It'll be
whatever.
hard to
But
argue that they did it wrong. So, um, yeah, but I mean, basically, like they're seeing positive signs, and they, you know that and that there's a lot of
and
the
those
market.
signs, when you talk about those signs, I mean, there's kind of two, right? You have inflation and employment.
Yeah. Well, I think in the Fed's view, right? The reason if they do the rate cut, they want it to be a consequential decision that's that they get right. And the Fed's like biggest thing is that they want to be credible with people, right? And so they don't want to say something now and then not do it because they don't maintain credibility. So they're very careful in what they say. But like economists kind of look at the conditions and they're like, okay, like the Fed has got to the Fed has got to be like getting close to this, right? Because like based off what they said in the past, right, about what key sectors they look at, key indicators, et cetera, like what they've said
Right.
in the past.
Inflation has come down. Employment is slowed, right? They like want to see that there's higher unemployment. Like they don't want people hiring because if businesses are hiring, it means there's too much, dry powder, cash lying around. So they want to know that businesses are kind of like conserving resources as they hold back rates. Businesses will then, hopefully, invest to a normal level. So they feel like they've kind of starved the beast enough.
Yeah. So I mean, like this is the Fed. Whatever the Fed says is taken apart very carefully. But they're going to meet tomorrow, and so we'll see what they signal for a rate cut, and we can talk about it next week, right? And kind of see what they'll say. Because if they say something like, we've seen inflation come down, and it's continuing to come down to a meaningful level. We might think our monetary policy is going to change here in the near future. That'd be a signal that they're going to do a rate cut. Whereas if they say like, we just haven't seen the progress yet, et cetera, we remain vigilant and determined to bring inflation down. They say, okay, they're not going to cut rates. Like that's essentially what they're going to say one of those two things. So,
yeah, it's. I mein, everyone hopes for this, right? Like we had rates for so low for so long, and everyone was a genius.
everybody's a genius. Everybody easy money. Call yourself a realtor and just put out a for sale sign and make money, or
Exactly.
go
So
into crypto.
So what kind of activity? I mean, right now, a few consequences of having rates really high. Like the risk-free rate, meaning like the rate that you can just, not invest money. You can just put in like a savings account. That's pretty high. Like you can get like a 6-7% yield on certain securities. Like even like a high yield savings account. I see them advertised for like 5.5%. It's crazy.
Yeah, most people say you should keep like 6 months in a 6 months of salary in like a high yield savings account, especially in this environment.
Mhm.
Then invest the rest, right? Because yeah,
Right.
like you're going to get 5 or 6%, but the market should return more of that. It should. You don't
Market
want
probably is going to be like 8+%. But for a lot of like if you're like an investor class, like venture, right? Like like you don't want to be taking risks when you can get a pretty high return from just parking your money. So ventures come down, real estate investments down, and I think you'll start to see, I think especially with AI, like you're going to see kind of return to venture. I think you'll probably see more funds being raised. But that said, I don't think 2020 or 2021 is anywhere on the horizon. That was just a insane time when we had rates at 0% and anyone's startup idea was getting 20 to $30 million valuations. And people were able to raise a $3 or $4 million round, like to build nothing, like to build an idea, right?
Yeah, there's no like we're pre-revenue, we're pre everything. So
right. That was the joke at Silicon Valley, right? You don't actually want to be you actually want to be pre-revenue. You don't want to make money. Right. Because once you make money, like you have to make more money. Like you're measured against the money. Like once you're pre-revenue, like the imagination is always such a strong signal.
I'm always amazed at how much that show gets right. Like Michael Judge is just like a genius.
He's such a genius. Yeah. Yeah. You don't want to make money. Yeah. Russ Hanneman. It's like once you start making money, you actually have to like grow that money. Like every month you have to make more money. So like just be pre-revenue. And that was a huge thing. So we'll watch what Jerome Powell is going to do. Obviously, there's kind of like the election that complicates things, so they don't want to seem like they're favoring one side or the other. I think it becomes a little bit less political now that Kamala Harris is on the ticket, not Joe Biden, right? I guess that's like a whole political science discussion of like how much do voters like tie Kamala to the current administration, current state of things. I always get frustrated with like political science because there's like not really that much data, right? There's only like an election once every 4 years and it's like a different environment. So it's very difficult to actually say what affects anything. Vice president pick, current events, like it's very difficult to like attribute anything because it just doesn't happen very often. But the Fed is like pretty nervous to do much. So anyway, speaking of decreased investment, Tesla, our favorite car company. I just bought a Model Y from Tesla. I've loved it for the past couple of weeks, but I was one of far fewer buyers. Tesla's profits kind of plummeted this last quarter, second quarter in a row. They saw 45% profit decline, but their stock only fell like 6%. It actually wasn't a very big pullback, and it's kind of recovered. Why should people not be worried, Kyle, that Tesla's profits are falling off?
I mean, I wouldn't say people should be worried, but it's
or why shouldn't I said why should they not be worried, right? Like why is the market not, if like Walmart's profits fell 45%, you'd see Walmart's stock fall, I don't know, 30-40%.
I think it's because people like, what business is Tesla in, right? And if Tesla is not really in the car business, it's in the AI robo-taxi business, right? People are going to value it differently. And so it's like different components of an earnings report people weigh differently. And so if they feel that like Elon, like I sometimes can't tell if Elon's like a master strategist or just a master bullshitter, right? Because he's like, oh, we're gonna do robo taxis, and it's like it's probably a little bit.
When he said to be fair to Tesla, he did say at the beginning of 2020, or excuse me, 2024, like our growth will be slower, right? Like we will sell fewer cars this year. He like prepped people for that. Partly, he's like, look, there's a lot more EVs. Like, Volvo has a great EV, Ford has their Lightning truck. Like China's selling a bunch of not in the US, but they're selling a lot of EVs worldwide. Pretty nice. I drove in one in Thailand a months ago. It was like a pretty nice car. I don't know how like reliable it is, but Elon said like, hey, this is not like we're not a car company. Like we are, but we're gonna grow. He said, did you see what he said Tesla's valuation will be in like a few years? Did you see the prediction?
8 trillion. I don't know.
He said that with the robotaxi, the robotaxi is going to be unveiled in October at their earnings call, which is like a self-driving Uber, right? That's like robotaxi, like Waymo or something. But anyway, he said with robotaxi, with the affordable model, so they're going to like release a model below the Model 3 that I think he wants to be like brand new is like 25K. And then like renting out your car, right? You can like rent out your own Tesla, basically buy a Tesla and like make a profit on it. With those things, he said that their valuation will be $30 trillion. And we laugh, but we all laughed when Elon said my pay package is contingent upon me 10xing the company, right? So,
Yeah,
like you said, is he a master strategist or a master bullshitter?
I think you kind of gotta be both. I mean, yeah, it's the whole robotaxi thing, and I know you've tried it, I've tried it. The full self driving is pretty good too, right? So,
It's insane. My wife and I like you hop in and like you can have like a much more relaxing drive. It's good.
yeah,
Like it works very well.
it does work well, right? And so this is the bet that robo taxis are going to be here soon. And once they have, I have a
He
neighbor
says
friend,
October.
a neighbor friend that works for Tesla, and he's basically said he's like, yeah, Elon doesn't like view he doesn't view the car in like the same way you view a car. He views it as just like it's just a medium
A
of
vehicle
yeah
for innovation,
yeah
pun very much intended,
yeah
right?
basically right yeah it's just like it's a medium for transportation, and just like the buggy went away, the car will go away, like as we know it, right? Like
Hmm.
you'll still be in something around on 4 wheels, but so yeah, he you know that's why he's like, okay, so they're not selling as many Teslas, but they're going to be all robo taxi, and then
Right.
that'll go well.
He's not that kind. I mean, you look at his long-term vision and he's like, oh, I don't know if anyone will ever buy a Tesla. Like I'll just have a fleet of Teslas that are robotaxis, and you know they'll have an amazing software package. They'll be luxurious and like they'll be better at self-driving than any other car. And you'll just get like a subscription, right? Like for the cost of your monthly insurance, you know, you can get a subscription for you and your family, and it like will pick your kids up, take them to school, you know, it'll take you to work, it'll take you on date nights, and like, you know, that'll be like $220 a month or something, right? And you'll never need to own a car, which, you know, sounds so weird to us right now, but like it wouldn't be that bad, you
The
know?
iPhone sounded weird, back in
Yeah.
the so you're going to do all your
Yeah.
work on a tiny little device and the device will have, be like, there's no
It's
way.
yeah, and they were like so much smaller back then. Like the iPhones now are so much bigger than the first, you know, first ones that were like, you know, that big. But yeah. I mean, that's the thing is like you think about what a Tesla will be. I mean, even Uber's original business plan was like drivers like labor cost is like a transitory thing, right? Like I think Lyft and Uber are still like, oh, eventually we're going to be self-driving, right? It's going to take a little longer than we hoped.
Yeah.
But it's definitely, I mean, it's definitely coming, right? So we'll see. I think that's the bull case on Tesla, right? Is that like robotaxis will come and Tesla will become mostly a taxi company, right? It'll be like Uber, but like way more profitable.
They also view it as like an AI company, whatever that means. Like just a business model will develop out of it.
Right. Yeah, we're probably not totally sure what that looks like. And hey, don't like love or hate Elon. I wouldn't bet against him. He's definitely a pretty good product designer. Seems to have a knack for knowing what people want.
Yeah,
In
and
their
they're
products.
building some like huge super like AI thing, like AI supercomputer too, which is like sounds a lot like Skynet.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. Yeah, I had a veteran message me today asking to join him in his fight against AI.
Oh
So
yeah, that's right. You did. You did.
yeah, he signed his message on LinkedIn as a longbow Apache pilot. So you know, I've never heard of an Apache pilot talking about, mentioning that they're an Apache pilot. So that was weird, right?
Oh, they'll tell you. Yeah, it's
I
not.
know, I know. Um, yeah, that was no, I know. I'm kidding about that. Most of my Apache friends will let you know. But anyway, Tesla, yeah, it's a cool car. I've really liked it. It feels different than any other vehicle I've ever driven. My mom hated it, but my mom was like, I don't like this. You can't see like the dash, and it's like I don't like the feeling. It feels like I'm in a rocket ship. So I don't know if it's like generational differences or what. But my mom didn't like the Tesla. I don't think she'll be buying one. My wife, on the other hand, was like, I want two of these cars, and I had to explain like why like you guys, we have a Volvo XC60, and I was like, no, we have to have one like fuel car. Like we can't have two Teslas. It's like doesn't work. Uh, yeah, right. I guess you could have two, but you kind of need one that can drive long distances and like not get stranded if you need a charge.
It's
So
not stranded. I've never been stranded with mine. It's more of like you don't want the drive to take like 2.5 times longer.
yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, yeah.
Which
I
is
mean,
just like having like because like the way it works, right, is the car will like calculate like hey between A and B based on this level of charge, you got to stop at a charging station here, here,
right.
and here.
It'll put it into it'll put it into your directions.
Yeah, and what it'll do is because like they're trying to like run people through the charging stations like quickly, they give you just enough charge to basically get to the next charging station.
Right.
So like what ends up happening is like yeah, I guess you could sit there and like charge your car up to like the full amount, but like it's super annoying. I mean it works. It's just it's got to become a little it has to become more
Yeah,
like
it's not a road trip vehicle, right? But like if you're going to charge it at your house, it works amazingly. Like it's a great car. Um,
yeah.
I will say it's like if you're like out, you can't do the thing where you're like, we've all driven our gas powered cars to like, where it like gives the dash, right? Like you're about out of gas and you're like, oh shoot, I need to go like around the corner to get gas. Like you can't really do that with with like an EV. You have to be like sort of deliberate.
You
Um,
have to be very deliberate. Yeah.
so
You don't want to yeah.
and you
Out
can't
there.
like run to the gas station with a gas tank and like run back to your car.
No, it's not.
So, you know, um, but anyway, I've been very pleased with my Tesla. It's also not that expensive, and they're giving military folks $1,000 off. So that was kind of cool too. I promise I'm not getting paid to advertise Tesla, but yeah, you do get $1,000 off if you're a vet. So, go check that out. Anyway, next we have a question that we wanted to talk about from a follower. This follower wrote us a message and said the following. He said, hey, thanks for all you do. You bring a lot of laughs, and I'm scrolling at work as I look for some relief as I push through the corporate grind. So we've all been there. Me for the past 2 days, Kyle, you for several years. But we all, I think, identify with, the corporate grind. Wanted to ask, or maybe something to cover in your podcast, what's your advice to those at a large corporation that are being lured by a young startup supporting an industry that you're passionate about? What questions should I be asking from the startup? Meaning, how do I ensure it's not a risky move? Well, I think it's probably always a risky move to go to a startup, but maybe mitigate risk, right? With a young family and stable compensation and growth potential, what I'm being told, at my currently large company, it's a risk to leave. True. But at the same time, the feeling I felt when I knew it was time to get out of the Marine Corps, I'm tired of the bullshit, not impressed by senior leaders, is how I'm feeling now at my current company. Thanks again. Yeah, I think this is a question that most every single person I ventured into a startup, did not work out. I mean, you and I, Kyle, work, we always talk about how Sitrep is an entrepreneurial venture, but we both have full-time jobs. Everyone's been there, right? Like you're sitting in a meeting, you're wondering why the hell you're like doing this instead of like hanging out with your family or doing something that you just find important. I think everyone thinks about what would it be like to leave and work at a faster growing company. So what is your advice to the follower?
I mean, I think that like there's always risk, right? There's always a substantial amount of risk to go join a startup. And like you said, this is not like this is turning the Sitreps thing has turned into an entrepreneurial venture just by virtue of us finding like some product market fit. So I mean, I think that some of the considerations are I don't for most people, right? And I don't know, try to avoid a cat lady statement here, like Mr. JD
Yeah.
Vance.
Another
I'd say the
Marie.
vast majority of people do end up having families, because it's just a natural progression in life. But there are people who don't. It's fine.
Well, even if you don't have families, like you will have life outside of work, right? Whether that's
Yeah, but like you have commitments.
volunteering, hanging out with your
But yeah,
like,
but what I'm saying is,
sure.
your life only becomes more complicated, right? For any number of commitments
Absolutely.
or
Yeah.
things that you need to do, right? And so when the reason if you don't have a lot of stuff supporting that you have to support and you can take risks, right? And if it blows up in your face, there's not like four people staring at you or like, well, we were providing on you for food, right? And like your house, you're able to take those kinds of risks. And so this guy's like, well, I want to try something like this, but I don't want to blow up my life and screw over my family. And like, the way I would look at it is, any company is going to be a risk to jump to. Even an established company is a risk to jump to, right? Like you're always like, how solid is this company, right? Like companies that used to seem like they're solid, right? May not be in a few years. I had a buddy who just left a company he'd been at for 5 years because it was like starting to crack. And
This was like a big corporate job, or
I
like
mean,
more
like
like a
it's
younger
it's a
company.
tech startup, but they've been around for a while, right? And
Right. He wasn't like employee 5.
no, I mean, he'd been there for a long time. The company had been there for a long time. He'd been selling their product for a long time. So,
Yeah.
um, and he was starting to see some cracks in the business that were like concerning to him. So he like left for another startup here in Austin. And so, I think when you think about like early stage startup, it's like how early stage do you want to be? Do you want to be person number 5, like you said, or do you want to be person number 300 or 400, right? And like those are kind of two different like risk categories, right? Going to a startup that has yet to find product market fit or is pre-revenue is, I think, extraordinarily risky. And you
Right.
probably either need to like deeply understand the space that you're going to and deeply understand the founders, um and like something has to give you like a level of confidence in it that like you can bet against, right? You can bet on, because just like blindly
Hmm.
going something that you don't understand or you don't have that signals from, I think is not smart.
Yeah.
um
I would also say, um, when you're joining these early startups, I think a lot of people get very shocked after joining, and even after like years of being at the company when a liquidity event hits, are fairly shocked with how VC math works. And they find out that they joined a company as employee 10 thinking that it was going to, they got an equity piece, right? And a lot of the times you're going to get paid in options, because if you don't get paid in options, you have a big tax liability, right? You get a ownership in a company.
yeah, to get paid
And
RSUs, you gotta pay money to the
right,
RSUs. So options are usually the better, more tax efficient.
right.
uh
And you can you can immediately vest those options. You can choose to vest the options immediately in 83B election, and you can pay some of the tax if you have the money, right? The hard thing is, like, you're at a corporate job, Kyle, that pays you RSUs, but they liquidate, right? Like you could sell them on an open market, and you can use that liquid cash to pay the tax liability to then deposit your RSUs.
that's
If you're
that's
at a
that's
startup,
that's in fact how it works. Is
at
like
a
there
startup,
yeah, it's all handled by like your whatever, like Morgan Stanley does it. So
yeah,
I just get the after tax stuff.
at a startup, you don't get any liquidity. Like there's no liquidity, right? The startup doesn't have the liquidity to offer. So what happens at the startup is you just have to fork out a bunch of money to the IRS. So if the startup is worth, if the last valuation of the startup is, I don't know, 50 million, right? And you get, 1% of the startup and they just give it to you as an RSU, right? That's $500,000. Excuse me. No, yeah, 500,000. And that 1%, that 500,000 is counted as ordinary income, right? So you're going to be immediately taxed at like a 30%, effective tax rate or whatever. A 30% of 500,000 is quite a bit, right? That'd be like what, 150 grand. So the IRS is going to be like, hey, that 1% of the company that you got that you thought was awesome, like you owe us 150 grand. If you can't pay it, you just have to just give it back to the company. So that's a little bit of a, some inside baseball there, but it like surprises people. So instead you get options, right? And the options are not nearly as lucrative long-term, but you don't have to pay $150,000 in taxes. Also keep in mind, like if that company goes to zero, you don't get the 150,000 back. You might get some loss on that, but you don't get the 150K back. So, the way that it works though is as you if you're employee 10, you're probably not even getting 1%. You're probably getting some options. It's going to be kind of convoluted. It's going to be very difficult for you to determine how much of the company you actually own. And a lot of the times the founders won't even know, right? It'll probably be managed by some software like Carta or something, right? And you could ask, right? You can ask this in like your negotiations, like, hey, what's the equity package? Like, what does that translate to? What is the schedule for raising? But the way that it works is these VCs are going to give money to the startup. That money is going to be paid back before anyone else gets paid back their money in what's called preferred equity. It's also going to have like an interest payment, right? Like a dividend that is attached to that accumulates year after year after year. So if the VCs give you 10 million and they have like a 8% coupon on it, that means that every year $800,000 is being added to that 10 million. They also might have like a 2 times payback. So they might be like, hey, you owe us 20 million before you even pay back your employees. So you could get to the end of the road with this startup thinking that you're about to make $1 million because the startup pays, sells for 500 million, and you get like a $60,000 check. And you're like, what the hell? I've been working here for 8 years. I took a way lower salary thinking I'd get this big equity payout, all to find out that the VCs set up terms that screwed everyone but themselves out of any money. So that's a very long way of saying, understand the cap table as best you can. See if the founders understand the cap table, because you might be joining a company, if you're not a founder, you're not like employee 3 or 4, and you're getting options instead of RSUs, you may come to the end of the road and find out that the risk you took didn't actually have that much of a reward. Not always the case, right? If you were like employee 100 at Google, you eventually made like $20 million, but that's the world's like most profitable company ever. So most startups, even if they succeed, you're probably not making that much money, or nearly as much as you think, right? You might make 200, 300K if it's really successful.
Yeah, I mean, like the founders really get most of it. You have to be like a really like a critical member of the
right. And even the founders sometimes, like there's a lot of founders that like find out that their company sells for 500 million and they get paid like 3 or 4 million, right?
Yeah. No,
VCs set it up like very generously for themselves.
Yeah, they're providing for their gamblers, right? They so
right. It's kind of insane. So that's one thing I would tell to the follower. The second I would push the case to join, because we've obviously you talked about the family piece. I've talked about the VC, the piece that maybe the reward might not be as big as the risk. There is risk in corporate jobs, right? There is risk that you will not, that every day you could not be retained.
Yeah, I mean, you get laid off. You could not advance in the career as quickly as you want, right? I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that can happen. I mean, they're generally safer, right? They're not
going to run out of money.
Full of fucked up stories.
We have a good friend that had a stable job, was doing well, and just got crosswise, with the company, and he's unemployed now. So it just happened a few weeks ago at a very stable, good company. So, you're never without risk in life,
No,
no matter what.
yeah, which is I think one reason why you can see people who are so like driven in corporate America because they're kind of like survival depends on it. Um, but
Mhm.
I will say that like you should think about yourself. Like, if you go to work in corporate America, like your your function is kind of be like you're gonna like learn something about like a small part of the company, and like you can either get really deep into that or you can kind of like bounce around the company and just learn more about the company in general and like how it operates. And leaders emerge out of both ones. But when they say climbing the corporate ladder, like they really do mean like it is tough to do. It does require sacrifices. Sometimes you got to bounce between companies to in order to get promotions. Whereas like at a startup, right, you could wear a lot of different hats, you get a lot of different experience.
You
Very
get
rapid.
promoted 5 times in the first year. Like,
Yeah, yeah. Like, and if the company does well, right, like you're kind of on that rocket ship going up. So I mean, I think that's definitely something to consider when it comes to like, should you go? I mean, there's like the financial piece, there's the career piece, right? There's like how much do you trust the company, how well you understand what they're doing, the founders, etc. So those are all
I'll
things
also
that
say,
we consider.
you talk about the financial piece too. If you have like when you join a startup, make sure your job is necessary, right? Like if it's just like, hey, come help us out. Like startups don't have enough cash to employ people that can't buy. Like they can say like sell or build, right? Engineering, if you're software, right? Or a salesman, like people that actually go out and create value or build the value. So if you're like an ops guy and you're being hired as like employee 8, your job's pretty like expendable, and you'd probably be the first to get laid off. But if you're being hired for a role that like no one else can fill, right? You feel like, hey, I can really add value to this startup. Um, and the startup, like look at the raise, like look at their cash burn, and you can ask them like in the interview, like, hey, I'm taking a risk. Like, I'd kind of like to know, like, what's the runway look like for the company?
Yeah,
If
like
they have a
I mean,
solid answer and they say, like, yeah, we're at 20 months, right? Well, like you can probably go for and like they just had a $10 million raise, right? You could probably go there and work for 18 months and like even if you
yeah,
lost your
yeah,
job.
you kind of like calculate it out, right? And be like, all right, like I can probably ride this out for X amount of time before this will blow up in my face.
And if they're
Um,
paying you, like if they give you a salary that you're comfortable with, vets also have a lot of vets have, you know, some VA benefits, whether it's healthcare or, disability payments that also make it easier, right? Like
yeah,
you lost your job, it's not going to be catastrophic, right?
you do have some financial backing, right? That you could
Um,
you could rely on, uh, which is important, right? It allows you to take risks that maybe you're not able to, especially at a younger age, since like
yes.
fine pensions aren't
Yeah,
like
you're not going to get a pension. Yeah.
aren't what they used to, right? So it actually can give you a leg up. I mean, it's something to consider, right? You know your financial situation, you know your family situation, how well you know the startup, et cetera, et cetera. Like those are the
Yeah.
things you
I,
should consider.
I'd ask them, yeah, what's your runway? If they're going to give you a good salary, like, and they have enough runway that you could work there for 18 months, like, no, you can leave your job and like, work for 18 months at a startup getting paid. And like, if it goes sideways, you can find another job, right? Like that's an easy story to tell. Like, hey, I joined this startup, it didn't work out. Like we worked really hard. I had this impact, I had that impact. Um, you'll be okay, I think.
Yeah,
I would ask them, like how much money, what is your equity stake? Like if you're not going to get, if you're going to take this risk, like you should advocate for meaningful equity and like ask them what that equity means, right? Don't just be satisfied if they say 80,000 shares, right? Because you don't know. Maybe they have like 80 billion shares outstanding. So like kind of get them to engage in some of the VC math. Um, I would also ask, what does customer retention look like? What is your ARR currently? Like how much revenue do you have coming in? What's client retention? What's customer acquisition cost? Like these can all be things that you kind of ask and not even seem, too nosy, but you should know, and the founders certainly should know that kind of stuff, right?
the
And if
lifetime
they can't
value of
answer,
the customer,
yeah. if they can't answer that stuff, maybe don't go work for them.
Yeah, they're like, oh, especially it's always the risky one. Like, okay, like we're pre-revenue, we're pre-product market fit, right? It's just like how, there's different maturity levels to this that people you have to consider.
Also consider if it's a fit for you. Like working at a startup. I'm working at a small company now.
It's super chaotic.
It's chaotic. It can be fun. Like I prefer that. I was looking for that, but like it's also like I get to know a ton about the company, right? I get to learn sales. I get to learn, working with regulatory regimes. I get to learn how to model. I get to learn how to go to a board meeting. Like you'll learn all that at a startup if you're in an integral piece. And maybe that's great. Maybe you don't like that. And also like, I had a job offer at Amazon where like my yearly budget would have been like 20 to 30 million dollars, right? It's like barely the revenue that the company that I'm at makes per year, right? That's or they're kind of like around the profit, but it's a lot different, right? Like you go to a small company and like you're not going to have any resources. You're not going to have teams of people to help you, do the jobs that you're probably doing at a big company. So you need to ask yourself, like, are you good? No.
Yeah, are you ready? Are you ready to wear 18 different hats?
Yeah.
And be worried about making payroll or like that can happen. So
like sharing rooms with people when you go to conferences.
Yeah, when you travel, you're not getting like this is not a big, corporate America yet. This is like there's some sacrifices that are being made.
Yeah, like you're flying Frontier and you're like staying at the Hampton and sharing a room. And that might be fun. Like for some people, that's like, hey, the risk is worth the reward, and like, yeah, you could get on a rocket ship and like, brand yourself well.
Just watch
Just
Silicon Valley.
ask those questions. Yeah, just watch. Yeah, go watch Silicon Valley. See if you want to be part of that.
See, there's entire jokes around it.
But anyway, Kyle, what's your week look like this next week? Anything fun planned? Any end of summer plans as we go into August?
I gotta go get my kids from camp this weekend, so we were gonna go to Fredericksburg on Friday and hang out. I'm like half looking at hotels right now, deciding where the hell we're gonna stay. But
it's like the old Germantown, like
yeah. It's actually where Admiral Nimitz was born.
I went to that museum. Yeah, I remember that.
So you've been there. It has like a bitchin' World War II museum.
Yeah,
there's a lot of good German food. There's a lot of good food in general. So it's kind of do that on Friday.
I will be hanging out with some friends in Orange County this weekend. I'm gonna try to learn to surf. I'm gonna go buy a foam board from Costco and go to Beginner Beach. So I've got to learn to surf.
I wouldn't know about that out here. But...
No, you're from the flyover states now, right? I can be a coastal elite.
That's right. I know. I feel weird to say Texas is a flyover state. It's like a massive, populous state. We have a beach. It's just not a very good one. We also have an insanely huge economy too.
Yeah, it's huge. Well, you have like three cities that are gigantic, right? Yeah. Houston, Dallas, and then like I'd even say like Austin, San Antonio is like one city, right? Like it's like doesn't end. Like you drive from San Antonio through New Braunfels up to Austin. It's like one metro area almost.
It's insane. It just never ends. But it's still kind of country too, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean it's not anything like
it's not like
yeah. No, not yet. Yeah, I don't know if it'll ever be. It's LA is a crazy place, man. Everyone here talks about it like it's it's another planet. Everyone here in San Diego County, they're like, oh, LA is insane. It's like don't go up there. But anyway, we'll be on next week. We have a good podcast coming up with the Friday Guard next week, so everyone can get excited.
That'll be fun. I'm glad we're going to do that. So
So, all right, Kyle. Well, I'll let you get to bed.
Yep, another day tomorrow. Let's
All
go
right.
do it. All right, man. Cool. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll chat next week.
And I'm not talking about some $400,000 a year working Wall Street stiff flying first class and being comfortable. I'm talking about liquid. Rich enough to have your own jet. Rich enough not to waste time.